This is the first President's Faculty Lecture of this academic year with Professor Nathalie Sinclair from our Faculty of Education. Now, some of you know, certainly regular attendees at the President's Faculty Lecture will know that SFU has made it our vision to be Canada's engaged university. We view community engagement as an important contribution to the community, but also something that brings important value to the university. And this President's Faculty Lecture Series is part of one of our major public engagement initiatives called SFU Public Square, very much a signature initiative of our vision as an engaged university. By providing you with opportunities to hear from and engage with SFU's leading research faculty, these lectures are designed to enlighten and promote dialogue on important issues of public interest. There'll be a chance to raise questions and offer comments after the lecture, and you're welcome to continue the conversation at a light reception that will follow the lecture and some of the questions and answers that you raise. I would just point out that this lecture is being filmed for the benefit of others who aren't able to be here this evening. It'll be available on SFU Public Square's YouTube channel. So if you do raise questions, you may become a TV star. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nathalie Sinclair. Among her many impressive achievements, Nathalie holds the Canada Research Chair in Tangible Mathematics Learning. In 2017, she was elected to the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars and also received the Mathematics Ambassador Award from Partners in Research Canada. In addition, she's recipient of the Sven Peterson Lecture Award for her significant contribution within the field of mathematics education. Now, some of you will have heard her on CBC this morning, or I understand she was on CBC at lunchtime or just after as well. But you're going to hear a much more in-depth account from her, I know, this evening on a lecture that's entitled An Arithmetic Touch, New Digital Approaches to Mathematics Learning. But before I invite her to the podium, let me tell you a little bit about her extraordinary research and how that shaped modern mathematics thinking and learning. How many of you struggle with math in school? Oh, come on, fess up now. Well, if Nathalie and her research had been around at that time, certainly if it had been around when I was struggling in mathematics in term, we all would have had an easier time. Her research is founded on the premise that a growing number of children struggle with number fluency. That's the ability to reason with and to apply simple numerical concepts. I still struggle, I don't know about you. Nathalie and internationally renowned software designer Nicholas Jakiv have, through their Tangible Mathematics project, found a potential solution. They've done so by developing a mathematical learning software that offers children interactive and intuitive ways to understand and approach mathematics. The software uses innovative touchscreen technologies that I understand Nathalie will explain during her lecture later tonight. But better her than me, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Nathalie Sinclair.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about the work that we've been doing at SFU in the Faculty of Education. And I want to thank Dr. Petter for inviting me to do this talk and thank the staff who helped set everything up tonight. So let me begin. In the historical approach to mathematics learning, arithmetic has been a purely cerebral activity. That means mostly about memorization. Educators thought that a focus on mental activity was the way to open the door to children's introduction to abstract mathematics. And we wonder what children thought about this, because one consequence of opening this door to mental activity was closing the door to physical activity. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Okay. So this is a picture of a classroom from the 1910s, and you can see that all of the students have been asked to sit on their hands. And you can also see that they don't look very happy. And I wouldn't look very happy either. And it's a really sharp sort of opposition to when we think of how people in everyday life, when they're talking, even when they're thinking, when they're communicating about mathematics, because they're using their hands all the time. And actually, they look really happy too. And in all cultures, at all ages, in all sorts of activities, whether it's at the marketplace, at the kitchen table, while you happen to be doing theoretical physics, and sometimes even in the classroom, people make use of their hands. They need their hands right there in front of them. And it turns out that actually every culture in the world has developed a very sophisticated way of doing arithmetic with their hands. You'll probably be familiar with this one because this is how most of us count. And while it just seems like moving your fingers, this kind of counting, and I see some people counting along with me in the audience, this kind of counting already has some mathematics built into it because it's giving us this idea that there's always going to be one more. If you're European, you might start like this and use your thumb next. But if you live in East Africa, this is how you count. And notice that already when you get to 4, you're getting to some ideas of arithmetic because you're showing 4 as being 2 plus 2. And then you're 5. If you come from India, your hands have been turned into powerful tools because now you can even count till 30. Each one of your fingers has been given the power of becoming 5. And in certain parts of China, you can even get to 90,000. That would be by touching this little part of your thumb. And while you can get to 90,000 in this counting system, in Papua New Guinea, you only are able to get to 27, but you get to do it with your whole entire body. So one thing that we learn from looking at all of these different examples is that people are using their hands to do mathematics. And I call this mathematics because it looks like counting, but as I said, there's a lot of arithmetic going on, especially when we look at how people are wielding big numbers using their hands. But these scientific diagrams don't really give you a sense of the human activity of counting, which is why I think some people took out their own hands to feel what it was like on their own. So 5 years ago, I was on Vancouver Island doing some research in underdocumented finger counting in some of the indigenous cultures out near Zabalos. And I met Fidelia there, and she's a Nuu-chah-nulth elder. And she all of a sudden started counting for me. And she told me that while she was counting, it was the first time she was counting in her fingers since she was 8 years old, because it was the first time she was being invited to count in her language. So I'm going to show a video of her counting, and I'd like you to pay attention, especially to how she does 2 and 7.
Okay, Awak, Atla, Atza, Mu, Sucha, Nupu, Atpu, Atlakot, Awakot, Hayu. Who I?
The smile is because she just realized why it was that she associated those two numbers, 2 and 7, with plucking. Because this is exactly the gesture that you use when you're plucking not children. That would be bad. Plucking chickens. Chickens, yeah. So I think what we can see from these kinds of videos is that our fingers are maybe the best tools that we have for doing arithmetic. We count on our fingers literally, and we count on our fingers metaphorically because we need them to be able to do our counting. And we've probably been doing this counting on our fingers as long as numbers have existed. As it turns out, there is neuroscientists have done some imaging of the brain while people do things with their fingers and count. And they've found that there's a neurofunctional link between the fingers and numbers, which is to say that there is an overlap in brain activation between finger discrimination and arithmetic processing. So what that means is while you're calculating, you just think you're calculating, but actually the finger-related parts of your brains are also being activated yourself as well. So that's pretty interesting because it shows us that maybe our fingers and counting have been associated again for a very long time and maybe through evolution as well. So it turns out that the biological evidence is pretty clear. Counting, and especially the production of numbers, isn't just a mental activity, it's also a physical one. And actually, even though we like these images from neuroscience, we don't need these MRIs to know this. Because it's why each one of you, when you first learned to count as a child, you actually counted on your fingers. And this isn't just true for children. It turns out that if you give adults a big number, a number of objects that's big enough to count, they actually count 10% faster and more reliably if they use their fingers, if they start shaking their fingers like this. And if you force them to put their fingers behind their back, they start making a lot of mistakes. And some of them are a little wily because while they have their hands behind their back, they start counting like this. So our bodies really need to be involved in counting. They really need not only to be pointing at things, but keeping the rhythm of counting. Moreover, it's not just in counting that we use our hands in thinking, but more generally, our hands are co-involved in mathematical thinking, in counting, but also all the way up to research mathematics, in concepts related to area, related to multiplication, related to derivatives, related to infinity. We use our hands to do all of this mathematical thinking. And it turns out that research has shown that children who learn mathematical concepts through gestures perform better, not just on the post-test right after the experiment, but also 6 months later. After you've done something with your hand, you remember it. There's something that you can conjure up again, reanimate when you're faced with the same problem later on. Teachers who gesture more in the classroom help their children, their students, understand more as well. The more the teachers gesture, the more the students gesture. The more the students gesture, the more they're thinking mathematically. Now, you might be wondering how it could be that gestures could be involved in mathematical thinking beyond the counting. And one reason is that the way that the mathematical language works is that it tends to be very static. A lot of use of nouns, very definitional, very formal. But when we're thinking mathematics, we need imageries. We need to think about how things are related to each other, how they behave. And what gestures do is that they communicate this very important spatial and dynamic aspects of mathematics. So the gestures could be telling you one thing while the words are telling you another. And in fact, Rafael Nunez, who's quoted here, did a study of university lecturers who were explaining undergraduate level mathematics related to calculus. And as they were using their formal language to talk about different things around infinity, their hands were going like this. So their hands were showing something really important about infinity, that it keeps going on and on and on, something very spatial and dynamic that wasn't coming through in their words. Furthermore, we talk about gestures often, or we used to until about 10 years ago, talk about gestures of the things that we do up in the air. But of course, we do gestures right from the beginning when we start manipulating objects in our environment. And it turns out that those gestures, like the one where you grab a cup of coffee or you grab a glass, that gesture that's manipulative ends up being a gesture that later you can think with and communicate. So even though I don't have a glass, I can go like this, and everybody knows that I want to have a glass. So the thinking part is really important because it's not just about communicating. When you're talking on the phone next time, you should look at what you're doing with your hands. You're moving them, and you're not moving them for the person you're talking to. You're moving them from yourself. That moving your hands gives you a different way of thinking, offers different kind of information than using words. So in other words, what we get from this is that cognition is embodied even in mathematics. That is to say, it is literally a function of our bodies as much as our minds, despite what Descartes had to say. And more specifically, given the topic of tonight's talk, we think with our fingers. So some of the people who think about these ideas a lot about embodied cognition and so on are philosophers and cognitive scientists who are interested also in the influence of tools in human cognition. The phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty argued that the blind person's cane and the blind person's experience of using the cane, of the experience of the world through the tip of the cane, demonstrates that sense-making is not limited to the outer limit of the body, much less than the inner limit of the mind. That we extend our own bodies as we're using tools in the world, especially powerful tools. More contemporary philosophers talk about the tool as a cognitive prosthesis and about people-tool convergence. At first, this might seem a little futuristic, especially if we're talking about math class, like we're cyborgs or something, but cognitive tools are as old as humanity. And we can say actually that we've always been cyborgs, which is what Donna Haraway tells us. Indeed, many of us owe our ability to read to the eyeglasses that we strap around our heads. We've been doing that for 1,000 years. And we owe our awareness of our difference from monkeys by our opposable thumbs that we've been carrying around with us for close to 1 million years. In these philosophies, the hand is our first tool, our most important tool. The tool that is most at one with our mind, the tool that we touch with and that touches us. So from this, we can say that cognition is embodied, but also extended. We are not limited to the confines of our skin, but we think with our environment and especially with powerful tools. It was with these ideas in mind that when the touchscreen devices first came out in about 2010, my colleague and I, Nicholas Jockiffe, were trying to think about how we could reimagine a way of doing arithmetic that not only relied on the fingers, but that extended the powers of the fingers even further. I happened to have a 3-year-old girl at the same time, and I noticed that when she was trying to count objects on the kitchen table, she kept getting it wrong. And as a math educator, this was not good news. So I thought I better make a tool that she can use to count. She figured it out, by the way. So I'd like to show you one of the tools that we built, which is called Touch Counts. I'm going to show you part of the tool, and afterwards you're going to get a chance to interact with the other part of the tool because we have some iPads floating around in the audience. So the one problem with this setup is that my iPad is taped down to the desk, so you won't really be able to see what I'm actually doing with my fingers. You'll just be able to see what shows up after that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on with my fingers. So touch counts is made up of 2 worlds. In the first world, we describe it as being more about ordinality. And in the first world, every time you touch the screen, so I'm going to touch the screen with my finger now. You won't be able to feel it, but I can feel the screen touching me. You'll see
1.
that I make an object, that I get the number 1 said out loud to me. That never happens when you're counting stuff in the real world. It doesn't start talking to you like that. And moreover, I get the numeral 1 that shows up. So I get that symbolic part of number thinking combined with the iconic part of number thinking, combined with the language of number thinking, plus I have my tangible part by virtue of making 1. So you might think, well, that's not very exciting. She just made 1, but I can touch it again.
2.
And I get 2, and so on.
3, 4,
So
5.
when we're working with young children, starting at about 3 years old, they all know how to count to 10. They can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, no problem. But actually, they're just saying a song. They have no idea how those numbers are related one to the other. So if you ask them, oh, I should show you that if I touch below this shelf here,
1.
the numbers disappear. So if I ask a child, how do I get 5 on top of the shelf?
2, 3,
This
4,
is what we see
5.
usually. Oh no, it went away. And so they start again, even though they know how to count to 10. And they usually do this 3 or 4 times.
2, 3, 4, 5.
And start listening to the numbers that they're hearing. And start thinking about what they're hearing is associated with the symbols. And eventually,
1, 2.
I'm pretty
3,
good at this,
4,
so we'll get
5.
this try. They are able to put 5 on the shelf. So they start thinking not just about numbers as a song, but the relationship of symbols and number words one to the other. Now, of course, any kid who's playing with this does not actually get excited about making 5. What they really get excited about
62.
is making something like 62. They've never seen that number before. They've never made that number before. And now it's a number that's come from their own fingers. And mathematically, this is interesting because it's once you get to those bigger numbers that you start understanding a little bit how our place value system works. Now, this is multi-touch, so we don't have to stay within a going up by 1 idea. So we could also do some counting by 3s.
65.
We'll start at 1.
2, 3.
And here what I'm doing is I'm pressing my 2 fingers
5.
at the same time. So I'm only hearing the bigger number. So we can
6, 8,
also
9,
imagine putting 5 fingers down at the same
14,
time
15.
and another number here. So we're not just using one number, but thinking about how we can express cardinal numbers using our both fingers. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to ask the iPads to be distributed, and I'm going to ask you to go into this world right here, where you're going to get a slightly different experience of a number. So if you don't yourself have an iPad, please turn around and find somebody who's holding one, and they'll let you play. Okay, I can see that you're really enjoying doing some addition and some subtraction. That's excellent. But I have a few more things I want to tell you, so I have to interrupt that. So the app that you've been working on is called Touch Counts, and that came out in 2014 thanks to a CFI grant from the Canadian government, so it's free. And most recently, we worked on touch times, which is extending that arithmetic that you were doing to multiplication. And I'm going to talk a little bit about touch times a little later on. But I wanted to come back to what was going on in touch counts, what you were looking at. For us, what's really exciting about these kinds of gesture interfaces is the possibility of actually creating a gestural arithmetic. So we think of the operations plus and minus usually through the symbolic plus sign and minus sign. And here what we can do with these gestures is actually provide an alternative to that plus and minus sign with the pinch for the plus and the opposite gesture for subtraction. So this pinch for the plus gets to the very fundamental idea of what adding is, which is bringing things together. Thank you, yes. And the subtraction being the opposite of the plus, so taking things apart. So that's a conceptualization of mathematics that the kids are learning by virtue of bringing those herds together, or the circles together on the screen. So you recognize in the middle the pinching for the addition, and on the right the taking away for the subtraction. And on the left, what the little girl is doing is, as I showed you, is to put 4 fingers down all at once. So it's a different kind of counting. She would be counting by 4s, but of course we could also count by 1s. So it's this idea that every time we touch the screen, we get a number. So I'd like to show you a couple of videos of children playing with touch counts, playing and working and learning with touch counts. This is a video of a little girl. It was her first time working with touch counts. She's in a Head Start program in Ontario in the Rainy River School District. What do you think will happen if you put the 2 and the 2 together? Can you tell me what you think might happen?
It will turn into 20.
20? Okay, let's see what happens.
4.
4. 2 and 2 together.
8.
2 and 2. Yeah, it makes that. 4. Can you make another 4?
1.
So you made a 1 and a 1, and you put it together and you got 2.
2.
2 and a 2?
4.
Oh, that's how you did it. You put 2 and 2 together?
Yeah.
Really? Oh. Can I try it?
Sure.
Okay. 2 and 2. And then what do I do?
You just put them together, then it makes 4.
Really? So I think maybe the best part of the video is how much she's moving. She just won't sit still. So that's a nice contrast to the picture that I showed early on. But let me tell you about a few other things that are important, what's going on here. Is this girl is combining, as I talked about before, the symbolic, the iconic, the acoustic, the gestural, and the tangible all at once. So we're not privileging one of these modes over the others. That's how number is being experienced by her. She's working on a fact that 2 plus 2 is 4, but she's not just sitting there memorizing it with her hands behind her back, because she's also developing the concept of addition through the gesture. So addition becomes something that's now a verb, something that you can do, not just a symbol that's detached from any action. And the gesture becomes something that she can think about and communicate. So at first she's just doing this on the screen, on the surface, but then later this is how she talks about addition. So that gesture has gone from a manual gesture to a thinking or communicating gesture. And what we have is we've given her body a new way of thinking mathematically. I think in 6 months, if you asked her what 2 plus 2 was, she would do the same thing with her hands, because that's how she remembers and reanimates her ideas. I'll show you one more video. This is in a daycare up at SFU, and these kids are 3 and 4 years old. Also, these are their first time that they're working with touch counts. And here they're in the first world that I showed you, which is called the counting or enumerating world. Make sure that you listen to the end of the video. So don't start laughing before we get to the end. Start again. Okay, Rodrigo, you try and make 5 this time, okay? It's Rodrigo's turn.
Yeah, but I need to put everything. I told Doc I'm going to 4. How do you do it now?
You want to do it now? Okay.
I wish you
How many did you make?
18.
You made 18 of them? Okay, now it's my turn, okay? It's my turn.
I made 18.
Okay, so the video quality is meant to reflect what it's really like to hang out in a that kind of environment. But what's important about this girl and what she's done are those 3 words that she chants at the end. I made 18. The I is important because it's about the personalization of the mathematics. The made is important because it's not just I copied it, I memorized it. It's not even I counted to 18. It's like I made it myself. There's this sense of agency and pride. Actually, after seeing that video, our first splash page for touch counts was going to look like that. But we were worried that it was maybe a little bit too biblical, and also those are like naked white men, so we decided to change that. The third thing that's important is the number 18. So usually, even up until kindergarten grade 1, kids stay within the 1 to 10 range because it's simple and you can operate with those numbers. And she's gone way past it. She's gone into 18. And while some people might think that's a little abstract for her, I think we can see that she's really made some meaning with 18. She's proud of having made it. She knows something about it. Not just having counted it, but also associating those symbols with it. So touch counts has been downloaded over 300,000 times. It gets used all around the world, in the UK, in Italy, in Sweden, in Germany, in Korea, in the US. And so we've been doing a lot of research with it. And I want to give you a little sense of the kinds of things that we've been finding. And I want to say also that this research has been done with a big research team, with a lot of students at SFU, faculty members as well. And so you'll see some of their names in some of their research. So the first thing that we found is that using touch counts improves kids' finger gnosis. Finger gnosis literally means knowing your own fingers. If you ask a 3-year-old to draw a picture of their hand, they're going to usually make maybe the thumb and then basically a mitt. They haven't really realized they have different fingers yet. It turns out that realizing you have discrete fingers is connected to thinking about number. So as they're pressing on the screen and getting that tangible feedback, they're starting to discriminate between their different numbers. We've found that it's helped kids develop some subitizing. Subitizing is the ability to say how many things there are without actually counting them. It's really useful when you want to start doing addition, because if you want to do 7 plus 3, you don't want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then add the more 3. It's easier if you start with 7 and then add 3. So subitizing is usually a visual thing, and what we've been finding is that kids with their gestures are able to know 7 right away. So it's a gestural way of thinking about subitizing. Kai, do you recognize yourself? Developing place value. Again, this is something that isn't usually taught until grade 3 because we do the numbers first from 1 to 10, and then we do the numbers from 1 to 20, and nothing interesting happens from 1 to 20. We should just skip 1 to 20 and head right into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and that's exactly what kids do when they're working with touch counts. They look at those numbers, so they start developing ideas around what comes after 73, because it's the same thing. The same principle of what comes after 23. After 73, I'm going to get 74, because after 23, I got 24. And then I can say what comes after 533, I'm going to get 534. So being able to work with those numbers at that high of a level is developing their symbolic fluency, which is very, very important for their future success in mathematics. Number fluency, so this isn't just saying what is 2 plus 2, which is things that we can easily memorize, but thinking of numbers in terms of how you can decompose them. Because it's useful if I'm going to do something like 14 plus 7, if I don't know what that is, if I can think of 7 as being 6 plus 1, then 14 plus 6 is a lot easier because I know that's 20, the plus 1. So kids have been using that color coding that you saw when you were adding the numbers together to help them think about numbers as made up of other numbers as well. Finally, we've been finding, next to last, finally, that kids can work collaboratively in touch counts. And this is a really exciting development in technology, because for so long, technology was a one-person input activity. You either had your mouse or you had the clavier, you had the keyboard. And now we can get 2 or more kids actually inputting stuff at the same time so they can work together. And this turns out to be great in arithmetic, because if you have 5 kids putting a 3 together, you're actually working on proto-multiplication of 3 times 5. If you have those same 5 kids all taking 3 out at the same time, you're equipartitioning, which is also thinking about division. And finally, for us, a really important element of using touch counts has been looking into how it promotes equity. And by equity, I mean giving every child the chance to do sophisticated mathematics. Not telling the kids who are having trouble with mathematics that they can do the simpler stuff, or that they can do the worksheet or do the procedural stuff, but they too can engage in sophisticated thinking. And with the feedback and the support that's offered with touch counts, with the oral feedback and the connection between the symbolic and the other senses, we're finding that kids, even who are struggling in math, are able to do some exciting things in touch counts. So that's some of the research around touch counts. And I just want to talk a little bit about touch time. Since it's just come out in 2019, we don't have a lot of research in the field around it. But here's the research team, and this is how one of the worlds and touch times looks like. And so far what we've been doing is extending our community engagement to schools now, and working with teachers to try and develop tasks and ways of working with kids so that they can learn multiplication in a more effective way. So the teachers we've been working with are in Coquitlam, Burnaby, North Vancouver, and Vancouver. And I have this image up because I think it's a perfect illustration of the idea of extending your fingers to think about something like 8 times 5 being 40. One of the teachers that we were working with just last week told us, touch times covers so many of the competencies in math in such an authentic way. And this is really exciting for us because we don't see the use of technology as adding more work for the teacher, being an extra thing to make time for. But when teachers come up to us and say, this is efficient, I can do it more quickly and better than I used to be doing it before, that's really great news. So I want to talk a little bit about some broader implications of this work, because it's not just about getting kids to do more math more quickly, but it's more about learning and more about thinking about mathematics more generally. So we can think of mathematics learning, and we have thought of mathematics learning as being about being either abstract or concrete, conceptual or procedural, about reason or memory, about symbolic or enactive modes from Bruner, and about mental or embodied. And the problem with all of these dualisms is what they do is they privilege all the ones that are on the left. So those become the important ways, the right ways, the proper ways of doing mathematics. And all the ones on the right are the improper ways of doing mathematics. And so what we get at the end is a percolating down to you're either, oh, I didn't even write it down because I didn't want to show it. You're either good at math or you're bad at math. And we need to change the narrative of how we think about math. And one thing I think touch counts helps us do is rethink these dualisms so that we are doing something abstract and concrete at the same time. You didn't see any quacking ducks on the screen. You were actually engaging with abstract mathematical ideas, but you were touching them. So it was concrete and abstract at the same time. You were working conceptually and procedurally at the same time, and so on. So changing all of these or ways of thinking, which are our dualisms, to and ways of thinking is a very important thing that technology can bring. And as Eve Sedgwick says, in culture in general, if we think about all the dualisms that are operative in our world, that we need as many tools as possible to get us thinking in non-dualistic ways. And that's really important to us because what will count as making sense in mathematics, it will depend on what makes sense. So what we see our work here doing in touch counts is providing other sensory modalities for kids to be doing mathematics so that more things can count as making sense. And so when the student is making something on the screen, making a 3, there's the symbol 3 that's coming up. There's the 3 objects that are coming up. There's the sound of 3 that they see. There's the gesture of 3 that they're making. And there's the touching of 3 on the screen. And what we see is this is a democratization of the coordination of these different senses together that doesn't necessarily privilege the symbolic. That is not to say that the symbolic isn't important. It's definitely part of that. But what it is to say is that we don't have to take mathematics to just be symbolic and just have that be the proper way of doing mathematics. In fact, symbols have been so important in our thinking about mathematics that when you see this, you probably say, oh yeah, that's math. You don't even have to look very far because you see all of those symbols. It's like a nightmare vision for most people of mathematics. And certainly symbolic text has been a dominant representation of mathematics for at least 800 years because mathematics depends on trends and fashions in culture and technology, unlike what most people think. So symbols, for instance, rely on widespread literacy. They rely on cheap paper. On the blackboard, they rely on having a well-lit room with lots of people in rows looking at the front. And most importantly, they rely on character and text-oriented technology of the printing press. But human mathematics has a long history before the printing press came along, in which reasoning orally was really important and representing diagrammatically was really important, mostly through drawings in the sand. This was the mathematics that Plato was worried terribly about. This was the mathematics of Plato, and he worried terribly about the new technology at his time, which was writing, because he was really worried that writing would destroy mathematics. It would destroy the thinking that for him lived in the speaking and the drawing. And in some sense, he was right. It did destroy mathematics. The dawn of print led to a gradual turn of mathematics away from physical reasoning, away from visual reasoning, away from motion-based reasoning, away from acoustic-based reasoning, and into a cold imperium of symbols. Here in the 20th century, we are at a similar transition to Plato's in terms of our cognitive infrastructure around technology, because writing and the whole alphanumerical representational system that has accompanied writing is now ceding to new technologies that are dynamic and gestural. And where the Platonic opposition of text to speech is a classic hegemonic dualism, the digital move extends rather than replaces our representation and our sense-making modalities. So the visual and the haptic join the oral and the symbolic. And I think Plato would be okay with touch counts. And so am I, because I see it as putting mathematics right into the hands of young learners. And I'd like to end this presentation by thanking all of the people who work on the touch counts and the touch times projects in lots of different ways, as teachers, as PhD students, as co-researchers, as programmers, as thought partners. And they have made a big difference in how we are making sense of the tools that we are building for children. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Nathalie. Nathalie, I think you've given new meaning of what it means to be a hands-on mathematician. And now we have an opportunity for some hands-on questions or comments from our audience. We have a couple of people with microphones, a little blinding light here, but I think we can see past that. And if anyone would like to ask a question or pose a comment, right back here. So we will have someone come to you with a microphone. If you just wouldn't mind standing up and asking your question or comment, that'd be great.
Thank you for your lecture. Your lecture touched on the history of mathematics. I'm just wondering about Paris, because Paris has been known for having the highest number of theoretical mathematicians per capita in the world. So what are the historical and sociological explanations for that?
About Paris?
Yeah, Paris had the highest number of theoretical
In
mathematicians.
France?
Yeah,
Okay.
in the world.
Well, that's an interesting question. So I haven't studied it in depth, but I have two ideas for why that might happen. First of all, France was the first place after the French Revolution to make schools available to everybody. So you have a long history of public schooling happening there, where public actually meant for smart high school kids in the main. And they started teaching at a time where geometry was still a very important part of the curriculum. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that they're highly streamed. And so the kids who do very well in mathematics get streamed into higher and higher mathematics programs and produce excellent mathematicians. And that might seem seem like a very positive thing, but the negative part of that is that if you look at how the French do on the international comparison tests, they're actually below the average of European countries. So it's a back and forth whether you want to produce Fields Medals mathematician or whether you want to produce a culture of people who feel comfortable with mathematics. And actually this year they've declared 2019 the year of math. And what they're trying to do is get more people to like math and revamp their whole system, maybe so that they do better on the TIMSS test, but hopefully for more laudable reasons than that.
Someone else have a question? There's one back over here, gentlemen, and one right up here. We'll start up here because we got a microphone right up front, and then we'll go back over there next. Right here, right here, right here, right in front. This woman right here.
I've actually two questions. One for the touch math. What is the scope of the program? Is it only for K-7 math, or this also includes other math concepts? Because the examples you gave so far are the elementary, primary examples. So that's one. And the other question is, what would be the role then of this ever-changing workbooks that publishing companies are working on? Is it a battle between math makes sense, jump math, and all those stuff? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Well, we are focusing on arithmetic for now. Before I started working on this project, I did a lot of work in geometry, and there's a lot of beautiful technologies that have been developed for doing geometry and also for doing algebra. So that's really a lot of stuff existing already at the high school level. So we were really interested in coming down at the elementary school level, where teachers are much more interested in trying to use technology in their classrooms. And especially to try and, once you start working with young kids, you realize just how much they can learn. And so the idea of boosting those kinds of things, that the curiosities that they have already at a young age and working with those was really appealing. In terms of the workbooks, I think in general, they can have a place. It depends on how they get used and how they get positioned. Some kids love doing workbooks. They love knowing that they can get every one of those exercises right. It's like doing a Sudoku, you know, it's kind of a peaceful experience. I think the problem is when the workbook becomes the mathematics, because the workbook focuses on all of those procedural kinds of memory-based ways of thinking about mathematics, which isn't going to help them develop the kind of conceptual understanding that we'd like. So some teachers have the workbook and touch counts side by side. And sometimes it's fun to model one of those questions from the workbook in touch counts. And then as you're bringing the resources together, you can do something more interesting.
This gentleman back here.
What do you think about a common core?
Oh, well, we live in Canada, so we don't have to worry about Common Core.
That may be the case, but 10% of the North American continent is Canada.
Uh-huh.
So I just would like to hear some views, what you like or don't like about Common Core.
Well, what I can see from afar is that the goal of Common Core was to boost the TIMSS scores by providing a curriculum that would work for the whole country of the US. And a huge amount of money was spent on that. An even huger amount of money was spent on assessing teachers and students. So when you see teachers who are spending a quarter of their time assessing students, I don't think you're going in the right direction. And what they've found in all of this assessment is that the Common Core standards haven't really changed very much in students' scores, and they certainly haven't changed anything in how students think about mathematics. So I hope we don't do that here.
We had a gentleman right back here, and then we'll go over their side of the room.
Well, first of all, congratulations on giving young kids something to do with their iPad besides watching videos, playing shooting games, or tweeting emojis. So that's fantastic. But the question is, have you compared this against like other physical methods of teaching early mathematics, like, the building blocks, cutting up pizzas, measuring spoons, adding things and taking things away? Like, does this really add more to it than all those other physical things where kids aren't sitting on their hands?
Okay, thanks for that question. So this is always a big tug of war when you're working on new technologies, because you develop a new technology, you have some hypotheses about why it should work. I gave you a bunch of them in my talk. And then you want to compare. So you compare, let's say, playing with blocks and using touch counts. But that already sets up a dualism. Either you can play with blocks or you can use technology, but you can't do both. Plus, your way of assessing the learning that's going on is usually through paper and pencil technology. So you're not even assessing what it is that the kids are learning through the technology. So we usually try to stay away from those kinds of comparisons and instead try to study and understand how combining the blocks and well-designed technologies can lead to better understanding, where kids can show their thinking both in the physical environment and in the virtual environment. And I just would like to say one thing about your first comment. We've been working with some teachers in Burnaby who have really taught us a lot about how kids can learn to become respectful users of these tablets by having experiences in which they're really learning something. So instead of avoiding the technology, how can we use these technologies to help the kids develop different relationships with them?
We have a gentleman right at the back, and then a woman right up here at the front we'll go to next. So right at the back, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I like your idea of combining abstract and concrete, because most mathematics teaching is abstract. My question is, can you connect this touch count with what they eat? Because I volunteer elementary school. My background is mathematics, and I teach poetry, but I also teach some numeracy. And one of the things I use is example. How many bananas you eat in 1 week, then 1 month and 1 year. And then you compare, if a tree grows 200 bananas per year, how many trees do you need? And then they connect right to the tree. So would that counter your technology would help to connect children right up to the tree?
If I understand your question right, you're expressing an interest in helping kids develop connections between mathematics and the real or the physical world. And I think that's very important. And as I said before, I hope you continue using your banana problem for sure. It's awesome. But there are also other ways of developing connections with mathematics that don't necessarily have to be in the so-called real world. The reason I showed you the video about the girl making 18 is she's having a real experience about 18. It's got nothing to do with any trees or any marbles or any frogs or anything like that, but it's real to her because it's meaningful to her. And in a world that we live in now, where we have to be able to be thinking more and more abstractly about the kinds of things that are happening in our planet, about the kinds of economic tools that we have, I think there's a place for helping kids connect also to abstract ideas. Again, you don't have to choose one over the other. You can definitely do both.
Right up here, and I have a question. There's a gentleman back there, so we'll go here.
I was wondering in your model why you didn't use, when the number 1 came up or 2, why you didn't have like a visual representation like tally sticks or, you know, and on the iPads it was like a circle, because there are different cultural representations. And is there some way you could flip to another cultural representation or include tallies?
Well, actually, circles can be found in every culture in the world. They use circles, so they're handy that way. And to tell you the truth, we did try with some other kinds of shapes, and it looked terrible. And it seemed to be distracting the kids from the kinds of relationships that we wanted them to focus on. And so a lot of teachers, the feedback we got from the teachers is that they were happy that the kids were interacting with the mathematics. And this helps them later on when they get into grade 3 and they get into grade 4, where they're being asked to manipulate those mathematical objects and not asked to manipulate tally sticks or stars or whatever. I think if we had seen kids feel very alienated with what they were doing, we would have tried to have something that was a little bit more specific, let's say. But we don't see that alienation at all.
And is this like a free download that parents can use at home?
And yes, it is a free download that parents can use at home.
And do you have anything like about word problems and probability and banking and interest rates?
Not yet, but...
You have to pay for that app.
I totally agree. Like maybe in 5 years we will get to something around probability.
There's a gentleman back here, but while that's happening, I want to ask Nathalie a question. I think I might have asked this when we first met, but when I was a kid, the thing that really unlocked mathematics, or I felt it did for me, was Cuisenaire. Cuisenaire was use of rods of different lengths and dimensions, and it made it tangible what seemed unfathomable in an abstract sense. And I'm wondering, is this a digital advance on Cuisenaire, or is it something completely different in your view?
Well, I also use Cuisenaire rods, and I love Cuisenaire rods, and I especially love them for the way that they present numbers in a very relational way. So when you think about what is 2, it's one rod that's twice as big as another. Right. So you're focused on that relation. Even I could figure it out. which is very abstract, actually. But when kids work with the rods, it becomes something that's quite concrete for them. So I think there's a few things that I think the technology is doing a little bit differently that would mix well with using them is the fact that the symbols are coming along. And this is, again, coming from research that's showing that it's very important for kids to develop that symbol fluency. And if they don't have that symbol fluency, starting with multiplication, they have a really hard time with mathematics. And then there's this, with the rods, you're using your hands and you're making gestures, but you're not making specific mathematical gestures that have been associated with the operation. So in a way, this forces you into this gesture, which is forcing you into a way of thinking about arithmetic.
We have a gentleman back here, and then maybe we'll
Did I
take 2
give
more.
the same response as last time?
I don't remember, but probably it works for me.
Push it on.
Of course, we weren't very digitally savvy back then anyway. So, this just strikes me as having gone that much further, but having the same kind of impact on children that, at least for me, Cuisenaire did. Gentleman right back here, and then we'll take 2 more questions after that, and then we'll have a bit of a reception and a chance to chat informally. Yes.
Thanks. And you may have answered a large part of my question just now.
a tool.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking about the abacus as a tool that includes a similar gestural interface. And I'm not sure about this, but I think that I used to think that part of the strength of the abacus was that the numbers were not, there was no representation of number on the beads. And so I'm curious about how you feel that, or like what it is about having the number on the ball or whatever in the program adds something or is different.
So the abacus wasn't a tool for early learners. The abacus was a tool to do calculations. The first people who used it were the people who were in charge of taxing in the Babylonian period. So they needed to be able to work with very large numbers and change like the size of the numbers that they were working with. And that's why you don't have symbols on it, because then it wouldn't be as flexible. So here we're really targeting not tax collectors, but young children. And since the research is showing us that there's this important learning that happens when the symbol is happening at the same time as the other senses, we thought it was really important for the symbols to be there. So that's sort of from the research design. But also what we found in our research is that the kids love the symbols. They get so excited about seeing those symbols. They say the word again, they write it down. And all of this is part of developing the fluency around mathematics that we wanted them to. So maybe later on we could make a version where there's no symbols and you decide for yourself which one you want. But maybe in 7 years after we do probability, we'll get to that.
I think there was someone right at the back there. Yeah, a gentleman right there. And then we'll do one more after that, and then we'll have a chance to chat informally. Yes.
Thank you for coming. I was just wondering, as somebody that also teaches young kids and is studying computer science, I was wondering what some like failures or like difficulties you encountered while making the interface and the program.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good question. It's very surprising, but we had a really hard time coming up with the gesture for subtraction. And I know you'll be like, what is there to think about? Because it's so obvious once you see it. But this was very obvious to us, and we had a hard time with subtraction. And that's because addition is a symmetric operation. It doesn't matter which order you do A plus B or B plus A. And subtraction is an asymmetric operation. So you have to think about how you're going to do that in a way that doesn't require kids to input symbols somehow in a weird parameter box, which would have broken a little bit the design of touch counts. So that was an example of something that we probably spent a year thinking about and trying different ideas before we got to the gesture that we have now.
Time for one more question. This one right up here.
Thank you. Is it on?
It's on.
Okay. Thank you very much. You talked about the democratization of mathematics, which I love. So my question is, are you going to, and it's free, thank you for that.
Are you going to the Canadian government?
Are you going to make it available on different platforms?
Oh, so if I could get more money to pay a programmer.
That was shameless. And how much did you pay this woman to ask that question?
I mean, the reality of doing this kind of work in the university environment is that I'm trained to, be a researcher and also to teach, but I'm not trained to do like marketing of apps and figuring out, all of the different platforms. So it's a lot of extra work, and it's sometimes hard once I'm like going with my research and finding some really cool things to remember. Oh, I need to also apply for a grant so that I can get money so that I can translate it into a different operating system.
Could I just do a follow-up?
Yep.
I mean, could you just do an open source license or Creative Commons, and then people would do it for you? Is that
probably, yeah. I could.
Or we could get some SFU students to work with you.
Yeah, that would be
and
excellent.
SFU Venture Connection, which is our student incubator, to help work it up together. So there's all
Sounds
sorts
good.
of possibilities. Look, I would really like on all of our behalf to thank Nathalie Sinclair for just a fascinating lecture on mathematics and learning. And Nathalie, thank you for sharing that with us this evening. And I think we're all going to check out the app online and hone up our own mathematical skills, as well as learn more about how children can learn more about mathematics and become more more literate in their numerical skills. There will be a chance, there's a short reception, a modest reception, because funding is tight, but there is some coffee and cookies at the back of the room and a chance to talk among ourselves, and Nathalie kindly has agreed to stay back, not too late, because she's flying off to South Africa tomorrow, or tonight, is it? Tomorrow. So we don't want to keep her too late, but thank you for that. I also want you to check out the SFU Public Square website, because there's a whole raft of really exciting upcoming events and activities that are designed to really engage you as part of our commitment to be Canada's most community-engaged university. That includes the next President's Faculty Lecture. It's going to take place on Wednesday, January the 15th at our Seagull Graduate School of Business, just a block or so away from here. And it's going to feature Dr. Deanna Rader, a Cree Métis scholar who is the chair of SFU's Department of First Nations Studies, also an associate professor in our Department of English. And her lecture is going to focus on the importance of sharing Cree and Métis stories, and in particular, and I've read some of what she's done in her research here, really extraordinary, the unexplained disappearance in 1967 of Métis leader Jim Brady and Cree councillor Abby Halkett. An amazing story. So I hope you'll join us then, and please do stay and spend some time at the reception with Nathalie and others who are here. Thanks for coming to SFU Public Square.